Okay, so today we begin a chapter really mostly about um, the labor movement, about labor unions. Um, and I think I mentioned this in an earlier episode, in an earlier lecture. I'm going to bring it up again. Look, you guys, I am a member of a labor union. I am biased. You need to know my bias that when I teach and when it comes up strong, I'm going to announce it. I support unions. I am a member of a union. It's not my first job that I was a member of a union. And union membership has been good to me. Every month I pay money to my union, a fair chunk. And they do things that I think helps me as an employee. So as I'm giving you this lecture, understand my bias. Um, so why unions, right? The first bit is kind of a historical look at unions. Um, and we're going to look at colonial times, so before we were even a country, all the way to the 1930s. And the question is, why, right? Why did this even begin? Why did workers decide that if they banded together and instead of me trying to argue for better working conditions or higher salary with big LAUSD or any other job I've had in the past. Actually, like I said, I was a member of the union at Universal Studios when I worked there 1 year. When I was an 18-year-old kid. Um, they wouldn't listen to me. I'm a nobody. But if there's 30,000 of us speaking together, they'll listen, right? So why did this even have to begin? Why did unions have to start? And the answer really is the Industrial Revolution. The answer is that the Industrial Revolution began in the 1750s, and this was in a time of pure capitalism, when businesses could do whatever they wanted. And some businesses decided that they were going to pay workers as little as possible. It was kind of a race to the bottom. How low are you willing to work for? This was at a time when people were working 6 days a week and sometimes 14-hour days. Something that most of us probably could not imagine, that kind of life. Um, and these workers said we need better working conditions. On top of that, this was also, they were working in dangerous factories. Child labor was common. So now we're talking about 7 or 8-year-olds. Sometimes you'll see my little daughter running here. Not the older one you just saw. She's 11. She would definitely be working if that was the day. But my 7-year-old, she's 6, but she's turning 7 tomorrow. She could start working tomorrow, put her to work. And if you ever look at her and you say to yourself, is that person should be working in a factory with dangerous machines? They like kids because they have little hands. They can get their little hands in there. So many people were injured, children. This was really a bad time for workers, whether it be men, women, or children. And during the 1800s, starting in the 1700s, but moving into the 1800s, these workers started saying, we got to do something. These business owners have too much power. Right? We have to find a way that workers have some rights too, not just the business owners. We like capitalism, but that doesn't mean that workers should be treated so poorly and that the business owners should be able to do whatever they pleased. So over the decades, movements began in society asking for things like socialism as a way to try and take power away from these rich business owners. And another branch of this movement was a movement that said people should be able to form unions, labor unions, where all the people who work at the same place can fight for the rights together, what maybe will make the boss listen instead of if it's just me asking for my rights. As time progressed, socialism became less of an option. And although it's going to be there in other places, and socialism creeps its way into society, So does unions. I mean, some people would suggest trade unions were part of the socialist movement. Evolutionary socialism, of course, is the idea that socialist ideas became parts of laws because people voted for lawmakers who believed in certain socialist ideals, right? Instead of this extreme socialism, communism, Marxist socialism, or utopian socialism kind of thing. That really is where it began, was the utopian socialism. So as the union branch of the socialist movement, call it, advances, people start to have strikes to ask for their rights. There were a few incidents that took place that caused these workers to really get strong on their call for rights. There was a situation in Chicago where there was a factory where women sewed things, cotton, clothes, whatever, and they used to lock the door with a chain and a lock, like a bike lock, because too many women were sneaking out to have cigarette breaks, they thought. Well, fire broke out and everyone died in the factory. And this just kind of continued this momentum that was picking up steam over 100 years plus since this kind of treatment of workers began. And these people would not be denied. Union strikes is when they decide not to work in order to get higher salary, better working conditions, something like that. And the truth is, full disclosure, we went on strike 2.5, 3 years ago. And it worked. We didn't ask for better pay. We asked for better working conditions. We asked for smaller classrooms, more nurses, more librarians, and it worked. Okay, teachers won that strike. I struck. I didn't go to work. Okay, I think there was a few teachers who chose to go to work. They went against the union, but most of us, unpaid. I didn't get paid for the 7 days that there was a strike. I never will make that money back. And me and I brought my daughter out the first day, my tween age daughter. I think she was 9 back then. And we went on strike, and it worked, right? We got what we were asking for. We got smaller class sizes. But back in the old days, before the 1930s, when people went on strike, they would actually go on strike in the factory, and they would shut down the factory. They would sit on the machines. They would say, no one works until I get what I want. And then sometimes the police were called in to make these people work. We have examples like the Pullman strike, where there was violence used to break up the strike. And in our book, we talk about the Ludlow massacre, where in Colorado, they had a 14-month strike against a guy named John D. Rockefeller, who was the owner of a coal mine, which had a very dangerous working conditions, and a lot of coal miners were dying. So they said, we got to get better working conditions, or else we're going to strike. We'll shut down the mine. We won't let anyone work here. Okay. Then he kicked them out of their houses, which was provided by the company at that point, as they were recruiting workers to come in and work at this place. And for 14 months, there were strikes there, till finally the police came in and started. And look, the strikers were violent. They were destroying property. I don't know if destroying property is violence. This is a debatable point. I hear people say that destroying property is violence. I'm not sure that that's the truth. I don't, that's your call, right? Is it violent to destroy property, or is violence something you do against other people? I don't know. You decide. But these people were destroying property, and the police were called in, and they ended up killing like 20 plus people, 2 children, 11 women, families. And the rest of the world saw this. The rest of the country saw this. It was in the newspapers, and people were horrified. How could you kill people for that? How could you kill women and children for that? How could you call the police to come in and shoot these people? And this was common. Okay, they would put down strikes by violence. Sometimes they would hire outside groups to come in and put down the strike. And the strikers, they would have weapons, right? The strikers would also be ready to fight. Like everyone kind of knew that this was a fight. This isn't like me standing on Ventura Boulevard, right, with my picket sign and the music bumping. I don't know if you remember, we were dancing out there. I wasn't dancing, but I was going to stand there, my picket sign, giving a little thumbs up or a power to the people who would honk at us, and the cars would drive by and they're honking at us the whole time. It was rainy and wet. My daughter got sick. It was kind of fun. I don't know. Don't tell anyone. Um, but anyways, this was violent. Look, it was a fight to get the right to get unions. And finally, in 1914, there were cases that would go to court, and the courts would say workers can't strike, and the workers would say, watch us strike. And then finally in 1914, there's a law called the Sherman Antitrust Law, and part of that law said that the Clayton Antitrust Law, part of that law said that you can form unions. And all of a sudden, things changed in the courts. And that's what we're going to pick up there in our next section.